My name is Delia Ostrov. I'm 32 years old. And the Sunday afternoon, my aunt sent a group text dividing my grandmother's estate among people who had not read the trust document. Was the afternoon I finally understood that confidence is not the same thing as authority. The text came in at 4:17. I was at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet open on my laptop. A routine Sunday, work bleeding into the weekend the way it does when you manage grant compliance for a foundation, and the quarterly reporting window is 2 weeks out. My phone lit up with a preview from my Aunt Rosamond, and the preview was enough. It settled. Elena gets the house, we split the rest. Tell the kids. I opened the full message. There were 9 people on the thread. I was not one of them. My cousin Petra had added me by mistake when she forwarded the thread to confirm receipt, and that mistake was how I was reading a message I was not supposed to see. I set my phone face down next to my laptop. I looked at the spreadsheet for a moment without reading it. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the deep one, where I keep the physical files I don't need regularly but maintain because my grandmother taught me to maintain them, and I took out a folder labeled in her handwriting. Not mine. Hers. She had handed it to me at her kitchen table 3 years earlier and told me to keep it somewhere I would not lose it, and I had. Inside was a copy of a revocable living trust, 12 pages, prepared by an attorney named Gordon Veach at a firm called Veach and Holloway, filed with the county recorder's office 4 years before my grandmother died. My name appeared in the 3rd line of the first paragraph, in the section titled Trustee Designation. What none of them knew, what my aunts had not thought to verify before they held their Sunday meeting and divided everything, was that the decisions they had made that afternoon had no legal standing. Not one of them. Before I tell you what Wednesday looked like, I want to tell you about my grandmother because the trust document is her decision and her decision makes no sense without knowing who she was. Her name was Vera Ostrov, born 1938, the daughter of 2 people who came to this country with nothing documented and built something that required documentation to protect. She understood paperwork the way people understand a second language they learned for survival, not fluently in the casual sense, but precisely, without error, when it mattered. She kept a fireproof box in her bedroom closet from 1974 until the day she died. Inside it, the deed to her house, her husband's death certificate, her own birth certificate, both of her daughter's birth certificates, insurance policies dating back to the 1980s, and a manila envelope she updated every few years that contained whatever the current important document was. My grandfather, Bernard Ostrov, died in 2003. After that, Vera lived alone in the house on Clement Street, a 3-bedroom craftsman that Bernard had bought in 1969 and that had appreciated in the way that houses in that neighborhood appreciate, which is to say significantly and over time. She did not discuss the house's value at family gatherings. She did not discuss her finances with her daughters. She discussed them, in the years after my grandfather's death, with a CPA named Arthur Fenwick, who filed her taxes and reviewed her accounts annually, and eventually with Gordon Veach, who prepared her estate documents. My aunts are Rosamond and Elena. Rosamond is 61, the older of the 2, and has the quality of someone who has been right about enough things over a long enough period that she has stopped distinguishing between being right and being in charge. Elena is 58, softer in manner, more likely to follow than to lead, but aligned with Rosamond in all the ways that matter when a family is making decisions. My mother was Vera's 3rd child, younger than both of them, the one who married and moved across the state and died of a fast-moving illness when I was 19, which is a different story and one that shaped my relationship with my grandmother in ways I am still accounting for. After my mother died, I became the one who visited Vera. Not because anyone asked me to, my aunts visited too, in the way of people who mark appearances at holidays and birthdays and consider that sufficient. I visited the way my mother had visited, which was often and without occasion. I drove the 4 hours round trip on long weekends and helped with things that needed helping, the gutter cleaning that required a ladder, the insurance renewal that required a phone tree, the appeal to the county assessor's office that required reading 3 years of comparable sales data and drafting a letter that Arthur Fenwick reviewed before we submitted it. We reduced the assessed value by $31,200 over 2 cycles. Vera noted this in her files. I know because I saw the notation when I went through her papers after her death. I work in grant compliance at a regional foundation that funds environmental education programs. The work is the kind that other people find tedious, tracking funding restrictions, maintaining documentation chains, making sure that every dollar spent can be traced to an authorized purpose, and that the paper trail holds under audit. I have been doing it for 7 years. I am good at it in the specific way that people are good at things that match their nature, and my nature, like my grandmother's, runs toward exactness. Vera understood my work. She asked about it on visits in a way that was not polite inquiry but genuine curiosity. She wanted to know what a documentation gap looked like, what the consequences were, how you built a paper trail that would hold. I think she was asking because she was thinking about her own affairs. I understand that now more than I did then. The trust conversation happened in the fall of 3 years before she died. I was visiting for a long weekend, and we were in her kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, and she put a folder on the table and told me she had done something she wanted me to know about. She said she had worked with an attorney to set up a trust for her estate. She said she had named me as trustee. She said she was not telling my aunts because she had thought about it carefully, and she believed that telling them in advance would create a problem she did not have the energy to manage. She said the trust document was in the folder and that I should take a copy and keep it somewhere I would not lose it. I asked if she was sure. She said she had been sure since the winter, which was when she had started the process with Gordon Veach. I asked if there was anything she wanted me to understand about her wishes. She said the document was specific and that if I read it carefully I would not have questions, and that if I had questions anyway, Gordon Veach's number was on the cover sheet. I took the folder home. I read the document twice on the drive. I was not driving. A friend had come with me and drove back while I read in the passenger seat. I read it again when I got home. I filed the copy in the deep drawer where I keep things I do not need regularly but maintain. I did not tell my aunts. My grandmother had told me not to, and I understood her reasoning, and the document was not mine to disclose. Vera died on a Thursday in March at 84 from a combination of factors that her physician, Dr. Constance Adair, had been monitoring for 18 months, a cardiac situation compounded by a respiratory infection that she had not fully cleared. The death was not sudden in the clinical sense. In every other sense it was what it always is. I drove the 4 hours the day I got the call. Rosamund and Elena were already there. The next several days were the practical business of immediate loss, the funeral home, the notifications, the people who needed to be called, the food that appeared in the kitchen from neighbors who had known Vera for 40 years. I handled what I could without making it a point of contention. Rosamund organized the service. Elena managed the flowers. I handled the paperwork with the funeral home and the initial contact with Arthur Fenwick to notify him of the death and request a review of Vera's financial accounts. I did not contact Gordon Veach's office immediately. I was waiting for the right moment, which I understood to be after the service, and before any decisions were made about the estate. The service was on a Tuesday. It was appropriate and attended by more people than I had expected: neighbors, former colleagues of my grandfather's, women from the garden society Vera had belonged to for 30 years, people whose names I knew from stories, but whose faces I was assembling for the first time. The eulogies were given by Rosamund and by a woman named Harriet Voss, who had been Vera's closest friend since 1977. I did not speak, because I had not been asked to prepare remarks. I sat in the second row and listened to 2 people describe my grandmother accurately and with care, and I was glad of that. The reception afterward was at Rosamund's house, 30 minutes from Vera's. I drove separately. At some point in the afternoon, I overheard Rosamund telling a cousin that she expected the estate to be straightforward, that Vera had always been clear that the house would go to Elena, who had wanted it, and that the rest would be divided between the 2 of them. I did not correct this. It was not the right moment, and it was not the right setting. The Sunday meeting happened 5 days after the service. I found out about it from Petra's accidental forward. I read the group text at 4:17. I took the folder from my desk drawer. I read the trust document again, though I knew what it said. Then I called Gordon Veach's office and left a message on the after-hours line asking for a callback at his earliest availability on Monday morning. I did not respond to the group text. I put my phone in the other room. I went back to the quarterly compliance report and worked until 9 in the evening, which is what I do when I need to stay inside something manageable while I wait for a thing to resolve. Gordon Veach called me Monday at 8:47. He was the kind of attorney who had been doing this for long enough that very little surprised him, and his voice on the phone had the particular steadiness of someone who understands that his job, most of the time, is to be the least reactive person in the room. He confirmed that the trust was valid and in effect, that I was the named trustee, and that my duties as trustee had formally begun at the moment of Vera's death. He said that any decisions made by family members regarding the distribution of trust assets outside the trustee's authorization had no legal standing. He used the phrase unauthorized disposition and explained what it meant. I asked him to explain the trust's distribution terms again, though I had read them 3 times. I wanted to hear them in his voice, in professional language, before the week got complicated. He walked me through them. The trust was structured to distribute the estate assets per Vera's specific instructions, which differed in 2 significant ways from what my aunts had described in the group text. The house was not designated to Elena outright. It was designated to be sold, with the proceeds divided per a specified allocation that weighted my portion differently than my aunt's portions, in a ratio that Vera had worked out with Gordon Veach over the course of 3 meetings and that reflected, in her own words as recorded in the trust notes, her assessment of who had been present and who had not. The financial accounts, held primarily in a brokerage account managed by a firm called Meridian Capital, where Vera's advisor was a man named Peter Call, were similarly allocated per the trust terms, not per the informal agreement Rosamund had outlined in her group text. Gordon Veach asked if I would like his office to send formal notification letters to the beneficiaries. I said yes. He said the letters would go out Wednesday. I want to tell you about the 48 hours between Monday morning and Wednesday because they were not passive hours, and I think that matters. On Monday afternoon, I drove to Vera's house on Clement Street. I had a key. I had always had a key since the year my mother died because Vera had given me one the first winter I visited alone. I let myself in through the side door that opens into the kitchen, the one with the sticking latch that Bernard had promised to fix and never did. The house smelled the way it always smelled, a particular combination of cedar and old paper and the specific soap Vera had used since before I could identify it by name. I walked through the rooms. The house had not been touched since before the service. The furniture was in its usual arrangement. The kitchen was clean. The fireproof box was still in the bedroom closet where it had lived for 50 years. I took an inventory. Not a formal one. I was not yet at the stage of the trustee process that required a formal inventory, and Gordon Veach's office would manage that through a licensed appraiser named Dorothy Wren, whose firm handled estate content appraisals in the county. I walked through the rooms the way you walk through a place you know well when you are trying to understand that you will know it differently from now on. I opened the fireproof box. The deed was there, as I had known it would be. The deed named Vera Ostrov as sole owner. The deed would need to transfer through the trust process, handled by the title company that Gordon Veach's office worked with, a firm called Harmon Title, where the lead coordinator was a woman named Lisa Fett. I made a note of what was in the box without removing anything. I photographed each document with my phone. I locked the house when I left and drove home. On Tuesday, I contacted Arthur Fenwick's office and requested a full accounting of Vera's financial accounts as of the date of death, to begin the asset inventory that the trust administration required. Arthur Fenwick was methodical and cooperative. He had worked with Vera for 11 years and seemed, in the measured way of accountants, to have expected this call. He confirmed the existence of the Meridian Capital brokerage account, a checking account at a regional bank, and 2 certificates of deposit that matured on different schedules. He said he would have the accounting summary to me by end of week. On Tuesday evening, Rosamund called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her message said she had been thinking about the estate and wanted to get everyone together to discuss next steps. She said she thought it would be easier if we could agree on things before involving attorneys. I did not call her back that evening. Wednesday morning, Gordon Veach's office sent the notification letters. Each letter was addressed formally, named Vera Ostrov's Trust by its full title, the Vera and Ostrov Revocable Living Trust, named me as sole trustee, outlined the trustee's exclusive authority over trust assets, and enclosed a summary of the distribution terms. The letters went to Rosamund, to Elena, and to the 2 adult cousins named as minor beneficiaries. Rosamond received hers at 11:14 Wednesday morning. I know the approximate time because she called me at 11:26. I answered. The conversation with Rosamond lasted 9 minutes. I am giving you the shape of it rather than a transcript because what matters is the shape. She said she did not understand the letter. I said Gordon Veitch's office could answer procedural questions if she wanted to contact them directly. She said she was asking me to explain it. I said the letter was accurate and that the trust terms were what Vera had decided and that Gordon Veitch's office had a copy of the full document if she wanted to review it. She said, "This is not what Mother wanted." I said, "The document reflects what she told Gordon Veitch in 3 meetings over the course of a year." A silence. Long enough to count. She said, "You knew about this?" I said, "Yes." Another silence. She said, "You should have told us." I said, "Vera asked me not to." The line was quiet for 4 seconds. I could hear, in the background of her silence, the particular sound of a person reassembling their position. She said, "Elena is going to be devastated." I said, "The distribution is in the document. Gordon Veitch's office can walk her through it." She said, "Are you going to fight this?" I said, "I'm the trustee, Rosand. There's nothing to fight. The trust is what Vera filed." She said my name once more in a tone I recognized from childhood, the tone adults use when they are trying to invoke an authority they no longer have. Then she said she needed to think. I said, "Take the time you need. Gordon Veitch's office is the right contact for questions about next steps." I ended the call. I put the phone on my desk and looked at the quarterly compliance report that was still open on my laptop. I made a note of the call time and the substance in the log I had started keeping for the trust administration. Then I went back to work. Elena called me on Thursday. Her call was different from Rosamond's, softer in register, shorter in duration, with the quality of someone who had read the letter more carefully than Rosamond had and had arrived at a clearer understanding of the situation. She asked me twice whether I was sure the document was correctly filed. I said I was. She asked whether there was any flexibility in the distribution terms. I told her the terms were Vera's and that I was not in a position to deviate from them without compromising my duties as trustee. She said she understood. She asked if we could have dinner sometime, just the 2 of us, to talk. I said yes. Not that week, but yes. She said she appreciated that. Then she said something I have thought about since. She said she thought she had known somewhere that Vera had done something like this. She said Vera had always had a particular way of looking at her that felt like an assessment she hadn't passed. I didn't say anything to that. I let her finish. Then I said I would be in touch when Gordon Veitch's office had the next step scheduled, and I ended the call. Rosamond retained an attorney of her own, a man named Bruce Haverstock, who specialized in trust and estate litigation. Bruce Haverstock reviewed the trust document, requested the filing records from Gordon Veitch's office, and sent a formal letter 3 weeks after the notification letters went out, identifying 3 grounds he intended to examine for a potential challenge. Gordon Veitch reviewed the letter and responded through his office. The examination took 8 weeks. At the end of 8 weeks, Bruce Haverstock sent a second letter confirming that the grounds he had identified did not support a viable challenge. The trust had been properly executed. Vera had been assessed by her physician as fully competent at the time of signing, and the trustee designation was unambiguous. The letter from Bruce Haverstock's office is in the trust administration file. I have kept everything in the trust administration file. It is the most complete file I have ever maintained, which is saying something because I maintain files for a living. The trust administration took 14 months from initiation to final distribution. I will give you the significant facts without the procedural texture, which would take another story to narrate. Dorothy Wren's firm completed the formal estate inventory. The house on Clement Street was appraised at $512,000 by a licensed residential appraiser named Theo Barstead. Dorothy Wren's inventory of the personal property came in at $23,750 for the insured items, with additional items below the insurable threshold. Arthur Fenwick's accounting confirmed the Meridian Capital Brokerage account balance at $187,430 as of the date of death, with the two certificates of deposit adding $44,800 at their combined matured value. The total estate subject to the trust was in the range of $767,980 before deductions. Gordon Veitch's fees for trust administration, Dorothy Wren's appraisal, and Lisa Fett's title work were deducted from the estate before distribution. The net distributable amount came to $731,240, allocated per the trust terms in the ratio Vera had specified. The house sold in the spring, 7 months into the trust administration, at $527,000, above the appraised value, because the market in that neighborhood moved the way it moves, which is up. Lisa Fett at Harmon Title cleared the title and managed the closing. The buyer was a couple in their late 30s who had been looking in the neighborhood for 2 years and who, according to their agent, intended to stay. I was present at the closing. Rosamond was not. Elena came, briefly, and stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a few minutes before the closing documents were signed. She did not say anything. She looked at the window above the sink where my grandmother had stood every morning for 52 years, and then she left before the signing began. I signed the transfer documents in my capacity as trustee. Lisa Fett notarized. The house transferred on a Tuesday afternoon. I drove home afterward and stopped at a hardware store to pick up weather stripping I had been meaning to buy for 3 weeks. It is the kind of errand that exists in ordinary life regardless of what else is happening, and I find that useful. The 14 months of trust administration changed my relationship with my aunts in ways that are still settling. Rosamond and I have not had a direct conversation since the 9-minute call in November. We have been in the same room twice, once at a cousin's engagement dinner in the spring, once at a family gathering in the summer, and both times we were civil in the way of people who have said what needed to be said through the correct channels and are not interested in an encore. I do not experience this as loss. I experience it as accuracy, as the relationship finding the shape that reflects the actual history. Elena and I had dinner in the spring, as I had said we would. She asked me about Vera, about the visits, about what we talked about the folder Vera had handed me at the kitchen table 3 years before she died. I told her what I could. I told her that Vera had been specific and deliberate, and that the trust was not an impulsive document. Elena was quiet through most of this. At one point, she asked if Vera had ever said anything about her, about Elena specifically. I thought about this carefully before I answered. I said that Vera had told me the trust reflected her assessment of who had been present. I said that was the word she had used. Present. Elena nodded. She looked at the table. Then she asked me to tell her something about Vera that she hadn't known. I told her about the county assessor's appeal, about the 3 years of comparable sales data and the letter that Arthur Fenwick had reviewed, about the $31,200 in reduced assessed value that Vera had noted in her files. Elena had not known about the appeals. I don't think she had known about the files either, the way my grandmother kept them, the notations, the records, the careful accounting of every interaction with every institution. Elena said, "She sounds like you." I said, "I think I sound like her." The fireproof box is in my apartment now. I brought it home after the estate inventory was complete and the personal property had been distributed per the trust terms. It came to me as part of my allocation, not because I had asked for it, but because Gordon Veitch had included a clause in the trust, at Vera's direction, specifying that certain personal items go to certain people, and the box was listed by name. Inside it now, the documents that were always there, Bernard's death certificate, Vera's birth certificate, the deed to the Clement Street property, superseded now by the sale, but I kept it. And behind those, in a manila envelope that Vera had labeled in her handwriting and sealed, a letter addressed to me, dated the same month she finalized the trust with Gordon Veitch. I opened it the evening I brought the box home. I will not read you the letter. It is mine, and it was written for me, and some things are not for narrating. What I will tell you is that it was 3 paragraphs, and that it was exactly what I would have expected from a woman who had been exact about everything for 84 years, and that the last line was about the importance of keeping a good filing system. I laughed when I read that, just once briefly, to myself. Then I put the letter back in the envelope and the envelope back in the box, and the box on the shelf in my office where it now lives, between the trust administration file and the quarterly compliance binders from work. Everything is filed correctly. That is what she would have wanted. That is what she built toward, over 84 years of knowing that the people who read carefully and file correctly are not difficult. They are protected. And they protect the things that matter. What you know and can prove and have maintained, that is the thing that holds. Not because it announces itself. Because it is on record, and records outlast the people who never thought to check them. I want to ask you something before you go, and it is the question I have come back to in the 14 months since the trust administration began. Gordon Veach told me, in our first meeting after Vera's death, that Vera had asked him one specific question at the end of their third meeting, the meeting where she signed the final trust document. She had asked him, if someone challenges this, what is the first thing they will look for? He had told her, evidence of competency at the time of signing. She had nodded. She had asked if there was a physician's assessment on file. He had said his office could arrange one. She had said, good. Make sure it's thorough. Dr. Constance Adair's competency assessment, dated the same week as the trust signing, is in Gordon Veach's file. It is also in my copy of the trust administration record. It is 4 pages. It is thorough. Here is my question. When Bruce Haverstock's office reviewed that assessment during the 8-week examination, when they found a 4-page physician's competency evaluation already in the file, prepared at my grandmother's own request, at the same time the trust was signed, what do you think the second paragraph of his final letter said? Not the first paragraph, where he listed what he had examined. The second one, where he had to tell my aunt what he had found. Tell me in the comments. I will tell you what it actually said. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe. New stories every week, and I always read the long ones. Take care of yourselves.